They laughed as she walked away, 5 miles under the Texas sun to a ranch no one ever returned from. The town called her Scarecrow, too weak to matter, too broken to save. They didn't expect her to survive the night, but the girl everyone mocked was about to do the impossible, tame the untouchable beast of Broken Spur Ranch, uncover a deadly conspiracy, and prove that the weakest flame can start the biggest fire. If you love stories of underdogs rising, second chances, healing, and love born from ashes, hit that subscribe button and stay until the end. You won't believe how this ends. You're the Scarecrow. The girl they mocked tamed the man everyone feared in his heart. The summer of 1878 burned through Dusty Hollow like a fever that wouldn't break. Eleanor Whitmore stood outside the general store, her threadbare dress hanging loose on her frame. The fabric faded from too many washings in lye soap and desperation. At 19, she looked younger, fragile in a way that invited cruelty rather than kindness. The town had given her a name years ago, one that stuck like tar: Scarecrow. It started when she was 12, the year her mother died, bringing a stillborn son into the world. Eleanor had been there holding her mother's hand, watching the light fade from eyes that once sparkled with stories and songs. The midwife, her mother's own teacher, had shaken her head and walked away, leaving Eleanor alone with two bodies in a future that crumbled like dust. Her father lasted 3 more years before the whiskey took him. After that, Eleanor became a ghost in her own town, moving through the streets with her head down, surviving on charity that came with sneers and pity that felt like poison. Well, well, Marcus Thornton's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a blade wrapped in velvet. If it isn't our little Scarecrow. Eleanor didn't look up. She'd learned that eye contact with Marcus was an invitation to cruelty. He was the kind of man who wore expensive suits in a town of dirt in desperation, who owned half the businesses on Main Street and controlled the other half through debts and favors. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. Mr. Thornton, she kept her voice flat, non-committal. I have an opportunity for you, Eleanor. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the pomade in his dark hair, the cigar smoke clinging to his vest. A kindness, really. A chance to be useful. Eleanor's hands tightened on the empty basket she carried. Nothing Marcus Thornton offered came without a price. There's a ranch 5 miles north. Broken Spur. You know it. Everyone knew it. Broken Spur Ranch sat at the edge of the county like a warning. Nathaniel Harrison, the man who owned it, was spoken about in whispers. The beast, they called him. A man who'd come back from the war, changed, who'd lost his wife and child to fever, who lived alone with his horses and his ghosts and his rifle. People who went to Broken Spur didn't come back. At least that's what the town said. Mr. Harrison needs help with his horses. Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket, crisp white paper that seemed to glow in the dusty street. He's willing to pay. I told him I knew just the girl, someone who learned from a midwife, someone who knows healing and patience. Eleanor finally looked up. Marcus's smile was wide, generous, completely false. Why me? Because you need the work, dear girl, and because, he leaned in, voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, because I'm a charitable man. Everyone deserves a chance, don't they? Even scarecrows. Behind him, Eleanor could see Mrs. Henderson watching from the boarding house window. Mr. Sykes, the banker, stood in his doorway with arms crossed. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what the Scarecrow would do. She had 17 cents to her name. The boarding house wanted $3 by Friday or she'd be sleeping in the church again. Her last dress was falling apart at the seams. What do I need to do? Marcus's smile grew sharper. Just deliver this letter. Walk north on the main road until you reach the fork, then take the left path. 5 miles, give or take. Mr. Harrison is expecting correspondence. You give him the letter, he'll tell you what he needs. Simple as breathing. He pressed the envelope into her hands. The paper was warm from his pocket, sealed with red wax that bore his initials, MT. Off you go then. Daylight's burning. Eleanor looked down at the letter, then at the road stretching north out of town. 5 miles in the afternoon heat. She had no horse, no wagon, no water. Oh, I'm sure a strong girl like you can manage a little walk. Marcus's voice carried across the street loud enough for the gathering audience. Unless you'd rather stay here, I'm sure Mrs. Henderson would extend your credit another week. Out of the goodness of her heart. Mrs. Henderson's face appeared in the window, hard as flint. Eleanor understood then. This wasn't kindness. This was theater. Marcus was giving the town a show, the magnanimous benefactor offering charity to the pathetic orphan. And if she refused, she'd be the ungrateful wretch who turned down honest work. I'll go. Wonderful. Marcus tipped his hat, the gesture mocking in its politeness. Do give Mr. Harrison my regards. Eleanor started walking. The town watched her go. She could feel their eyes on her back, hear the whispers starting already. Some laughed, some shook their heads. No one offered her water for the journey. By the time she reached the edge of town, the sun was a hammer beating down on her uncovered head. Her boots, 2 sizes too large, inherited from a woman who died of cholera, raised blisters with every step. The road stretched ahead, shimmering in the heat, endless. She should have asked for water, should have taken a hat, should have said no. But Eleanor Whitmore had learned long ago that should have was a luxury for people who had choices. So she walked. The first mile passed in a blur of heat and dust. The road was hard-packed earth, rutted from wagon wheels, dotted with stones that seemed to find every tender spot on her feet. She tried to stay in what little shade the scrub brush offered, but the Texas sun found her anyway, relentless. The second mile brought thirst. Her mouth went dry, tongue thick. She thought about the creek that ran behind the church, the cool water she'd drunk that morning. It felt like a lifetime ago. The third mile brought doubt. The landscape had changed, fewer trees, more open range. No houses, no people, just grass and sky, and the road that seemed to lead nowhere. What if Marcus had lied? What if there was no ranch, no Nathaniel Harrison, no job waiting? What if this was just another of his games, sending the Scarecrow out into the wilderness to see how long she'd last? The fourth mile brought pain. Real pain. Muscles burning, blisters bleeding, head pounding with each heartbeat. The sun was lower now, but no less vicious. Her vision started to blur at the edges. She thought about her mother. The way she'd sung while grinding herbs, her hands steady and sure. The way she'd taught Eleanor the names of plants, the properties of roots and flowers. Chamomile for calm, yarrow for wounds, honey and garlic for infection. You have gentle hands, Eleanor, her mother had said once. Healing hands. Don't let this world make them hard. Eleanor looked down at her hands, now rough, calloused, shaking with exhaustion. Not gentle, not healing, just trying to survive. The fifth mile almost killed her. The fork in the road appeared like a mirage, and for a moment, Eleanor thought she was hallucinating. But no, there it was. The main road continued north. A smaller path, barely more than wheel ruts, branched left. She took the left path. The sign appeared a quarter-mile later, weather-beaten wood nailed to a post, Broken Spur Ranch. No trespassing. Eleanor kept walking. The path curved through a stand of cottonwoods, and suddenly there it was, a ranch house built of dark wood and stone, solid and imposing. A barn stood behind it, corrals stretching out to the west. In the distance, she could see horses moving in the pastures. It was real. All of it. She made it to the porch steps before her legs gave out. The world tilted sideways. She grabbed for the railing. Mist felt her knees hit wood. The letter fell from her hand, white against the dark boards. Somewhere a door opened. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Eleanor tried to look up, tried to speak, but her vision was narrowing to a tunnel, her breath coming in gasps. She saw boots first. Worn leather scuffed at the toes. Then legs, denim stained with dust and work. A man's form, tall and broad-shouldered, blocking out the sun. What the hell? The voice was rough, unused to company. Not cruel, but not kind either. Wary. Eleanor forced her eyes to focus. The man looking down at her had a face carved from hard lines and harder years. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples. Eyes the color of storm clouds set deep beneath heavy brows. A beard neatly trimmed, hiding a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. Nathaniel Harrison, the beast of Broken Spur. Eleanor's voice came out as a croak. Letter, Marcus Thornton. He said you needed. She couldn't finish. The world was spinning now, her body deciding it had carried her as far as it could. Nathaniel moved fast for a big man. He caught her before she hit the porch, his hands rough but steady. Up close, she could smell horse and leather, and something else, wood smoke maybe. Something almost comforting. Jesus Christ. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, carried her up the steps. What kind of goddamn fool sends someone out here on foot in this heat? Eleanor tried to answer, but darkness was pulling at her soft and insistent. The last thing she heard before consciousness slipped away was Nathaniel's voice, low and furious, and the sound of paper tearing. When Eleanor woke, the world was cool and dim. She lay on something soft, a bed she realized with actual sheets that smelled of Lee and sunshine. Her boots were gone. Someone had covered her with a thin blanket despite the heat. The room was simple. Wood walls, a window with curtains drawn against the sun, a table with a pitcher of water and a tin cup. Water. Eleanor sat up too fast and her head swam. She steadied herself, reached for the pitcher, with shaking hands, poured water that sloshed over the rim. She didn't care. She drank 3 cups in quick succession, the cool liquid like salvation sliding down her throat. Only then did she notice the door was open, and in the doorway stood Nathaniel Harrison, watching her with those storm cloud eyes. "You're awake." Not a question, a statement of fact. Eleanor set down the cup, suddenly aware of how she must look, dress rumpled, hair falling from its pins, face probably red from sun and heat. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Didn't mean to what? Pass out on my porch, nearly die of heat stroke delivering a letter. He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "How far did you walk?" "5 miles from town." Something flickered in his expression. Disbelief maybe, or anger. "Marcus Thornton sent you." "Yes, sir. He said you needed help with horses, that there was work." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, the letter Eleanor realized, though it was torn nearly in half. "You know what this says?" Eleanor shook her head. He let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. "Nothing. It says absolutely nothing. It's blank." The room seemed to tilt again, but this time it had nothing to do with heat stroke. "What? Blank, empty, not a goddamn word." He crumpled the paper in his fist. "Marcus Thornton sent you out here with the blank letter as some kind of joke, and you walked 5 miles in 100-degree heat to deliver it." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. Of course it was a joke. The whole town had probably been laughing, watching the Scarecrow set off on a fool's errand. Marcus had probably bet someone how far she'd get before she turned back. She hadn't turned back. She should have. "I'll go." She swung her legs over the side of the bed, ignoring how her muscles screamed in protest. "I'm sorry to have bothered you. I'll just—" "You'll do no such thing." Nathaniel's voice cut through her rambling. "Sun's setting in an hour. You're in no condition to walk anywhere. You'll stay the night, leave at first light when it's cooler." "I don't want charity." "Good, I'm not offering charity. I'm offering common sense." He moved aside from the doorway. "There's stew on the stove if you're hungry. Outhouse is out back. Don't touch anything in the barn." He turned to leave, then paused. "What's your name?" "Eleanor." "Eleanor Whitmore." He nodded once, then walked away, his footsteps heavy on the floorboards. Eleanor sat alone in the quiet room, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into evening. Somewhere a horse whinnied. Wind rattled the window frame. The house creaked and breathed like a living thing. She should leave. Should walk back to town, even in the dark. Even with her blisters and exhaustion. Should go back to her small room at the boarding house in her small life and forget this whole humiliating day. But something kept her in that bed in that cool, dim room. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the simple, startling fact that Nathaniel Harrison, the beast of Broken Spur, had caught her when she fell. Eleanor stood, tested her legs, found them steady enough. She made her way through the house, clean, sparse, everything in its place, to a kitchen that smelled of wood smoke and cooking meat. The stew sat in a pot on the stove, steam rising. Eleanor found a bowl, ladled out a portion. The first bite was a revelation, rich, savory, real food cooked with care. She ate slowly, savoring every mouthful. Through the window, she could see Nathaniel in the corral, working with a horse. Even from a distance, she could see the animal was agitated, dancing away from his approach. He moved with patience, hands open, a voice too low to hear but steady in rhythm. Eleanor finished her meal, washed her bowl in the basin, then drifted to the door. The evening air was cooling finally, the brutal heat of the day giving way to something almost pleasant. She stepped onto the porch, careful to stay quiet, and watched. Nathaniel was talking to the horse now, a mare, Eleanor thought, though she knew little about horses. The animal's coat gleamed even in the fading light, copper red like embers. Beautiful, and clearly suffering. The mare's left foreleg was swollen, and she held it at an awkward angle. Infection, Eleanor thought automatically, her mother's training rising up unbidden. The horse favored that leg, wouldn't let Nathaniel near it. Easy, Ember, Nathaniel murmured. Easy, girl. I know it hurts. Just let me help you. But the mare wasn't having it. She tossed her head, backed away, ears flat against her skull. Eleanor watched him try for 10 minutes. Watched him maintain that impossible patience, even as the horse grew more agitated. Finally, he stepped back, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Stubborn creature, he muttered. Then louder, I know you're watching. Eleanor froze. Nathaniel turned, looking directly at her. You know anything about horses? No, sir. Infections. Eleanor hesitated. My mother was a midwife. She taught me some about wounds, healing. He studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor couldn't read his expression in the dimming light. This mare, Ember, she's got an infected wound on her foreleg. Stepped on something sharp 3 days ago. It's getting worse, and she won't let me near it. Won't let anyone near it. She's always been... He trailed off. Difficult. Eleanor understood difficult. Understood being the creature everyone gave up on. May I... She gestured toward the corral. Nathaniel's eyebrows rose. You just nearly died. You should be resting. I'm fine. A lie, but a small one. And I'd like to help, if I can. He looked at her for a long moment, then shrugged. Your funeral. She's bitten 3 men and kicked 2 more. Try not to get yourself killed on my property. The paperwork's a nightmare. Was that a joke? Eleanor couldn't tell. She crossed to the corral fence, climbed over, carefully landed in the dirt with her borrowed boots. Up close, Ember was magnificent, all muscle and fire eyes rolling white with pain and fear. Hey there, Eleanor said softly. No sudden movements. Her mother had taught her that 2 wounded creatures needed calm, needed gentle. I know it hurts. The mare's ears flicked forward, listening. Eleanor kept talking, kept her voice low and steady as she moved closer. Not directly toward the horse, but at an angle non-threatening. She could feel Nathaniel watching, tense, probably ready to pull her back if Ember charged. They call me Scarecrow, Eleanor murmured, because I'm thin and weak and not good for much. But you know what scarecrows have about? They stand in the field, they protect things. They don't run when the crows come. They just stand. She was close now, close enough to see the sweat on Ember's coat, the way the mare trembled with pain. Close enough to smell horse and dust and the sweet sick scent of infection. I won't hurt you, Eleanor whispered. I promise. I just want to see. She held out her hand, palm up empty, offering nothing but presence. Ember snorted, tossed her head, but she didn't move away. Eleanor stood there, hand extended, and waited. The world narrowed to this moment, the mare's labored breathing, the evening air cooling her sunburned skin, the absolute stillness required to earn trust. Finally, Ember lowered her head and sniffed Eleanor's palm. Good girl, Eleanor breathed. That's a good girl. Slowly, carefully, she reached up to touch the mare's neck. The coat was hot, the muscles tense beneath her fingers. She stroked gently, maintaining that soft murmur of sound. Can I see your leg? Can I help? She knelt in the dirt, aware of Nathaniel's sharp intake of breath behind her. This was the dangerous part, being on the ground vulnerable, with a hurt animal standing over her. But Ember didn't strike. She shifted her weight, ears still forward, watching Eleanor with one large, dark eye. The wound was worse than Eleanor had thought. A deep puncture in the mare's foreleg, the edges red and swollen, weeping clear fluid that smelled wrong. 3 days old, Nathaniel had said. 3 days of infection, spreading pain and building. Oh, sweetheart, Eleanor whispered. That's bad. That's really bad. She looked back at Nathaniel, who stood at the fence, watching with an expression she couldn't name. I need water, clean water, and honey if you have it, and... She thought back to the herbs her mother kept, the remedies learned through years of practice. Yarrow or comfrey, anything for drawing out infection. Nathaniel didn't move for a moment. Then, I have honey, and there's wild yarrow growing by the creek. Can you get them? Please. He stared at her, this skinny girl kneeling in his corral, covered in dust and sunburn, speaking calmly to a horse that had terrorized grown men. Then he turned and strode toward the house. Eleanor stayed with Ember, kept talking, kept stroking her neck. The mare's breathing had slowed, the trembling eased. She wasn't calm exactly, but she wasn't fighting anymore. You and me, Eleanor murmured. We're the same, aren't we? Everybody thinks we're too damaged, too difficult, not worth the trouble. She rested her forehead against Ember's warm neck. But we're not. We're just standing, like scarecrows, waiting for someone to see we're not really broken, just hurt. Nathaniel returned with a bucket of water, a jar of amber honey, and a handful of yarrow purple flowers still attached to the stems. He also carried a clean cloth and what looked like a bottle of whiskey. For cleaning the wound, he said, catching Eleanor's look, unless you need it for courage. The wound, Eleanor said firmly. She worked slowly, carefully. First washing the area with clean water, then whiskey that made Ember dance sideways until Eleanor's soothing voice settled her again. She crushed the yarrow between her palms, releasing the sharp green scent, mixed it with honey to form a thick paste. This will hurt, she told the mare. I'm sorry, but it will help. I promise it will help. She applied the poultice gently, working it into the wound while Ember stamped and snorted, but didn't pull away, didn't bite, didn't kick. How are you doing that? Nathaniel's voice was quiet, awed almost. I'm not doing anything. Eleanor wrapped the cloth around the legs, securing the poultice. I'm just here. Sometimes that's enough. When she finished, she stayed kneeling in the dirt, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Her hands were shaking again. Her vision blurred. Strong hands gripped her elbows, lifted her to her feet. Nathaniel's face swam into focus closer than before. You need to rest. The poultice needs to stay on overnight. I should check it in the morning, clean it again, reapply. In the morning, he said firmly. Right now you need sleep. Eleanor wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. She swayed and Nathaniel's grip tightened. I've got you, he said. And somehow for the first time in years, Eleanor believed it. He helped her back to the house, back to that cool, dim room. She collapsed onto the bed without bothering to undress, too tired to care about propriety. Thank you, she mumbled. For the stew, for everything. She thought she heard him respond, but sleep was already pulling her under, soft and irresistible. The last thing she remembered was the sound of his footsteps walking away and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of having done something right. Eleanor woke to bird song and golden light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back: the walk, the heat, the blank letter, the mare. Ember. She sat up too quickly, head spinning. How long had she slept? What time was it? She needed to check the poultice, make sure the infection wasn't spreading. She found her boots by the door, shoved her feet into them despite the protest of her blisters. The house was quiet, but she could hear sounds from outside: horses moving, the clang of metal on metal. The morning air was cool, almost sweet after yesterday's brutal heat. Eleanor hurried to the corral, her heart pounding. Ember stood in the far corner, and Eleanor's breath caught. The mare's head was up, ears forward, and she was bearing weight on the injured leg. She let me change the poultice an hour ago. Eleanor spun. Nathaniel stood by the barn holding a pitchfork, watching her with that same unreadable expression. You did, followed what you did last night, washed it, crushed the yarrow, mixed it with honey. She danced a bit, but she didn't fight. He set down the pitchfork. That mare hasn't let me near her injuries before. She'd rather suffer than accept help. But after what you did yesterday, he trailed off, shaking his head. The infection, Eleanor asked. Better. Not gone, but better. The swelling's down. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her knees weak. You should go, Nathaniel said abruptly, before it gets too hot. I'll saddle a horse for you, get you back to town in an hour. Eleanor looked at him, then at Ember, then back at the ranch, this solid, real place, where for one night she'd been useful instead of pitied. What if I stayed? The words were out before she could stop them. Nathaniel went very still. What? Just for a few days, until Ember's infection clears. She'll need the poultice changed twice daily, the wound checked for. Eleanor's words tumbled over each other. I mean, if you want. I don't want to impose. But I could help. And you wouldn't have to pay me or anything, just food and a place to sleep, and I promise I won't be any trouble. Eleanor. She stopped, breathless. Nathaniel studied her with those storm cloud eyes, and Eleanor braced herself for rejection. Of course he didn't want some half-starved town charity case hanging around his ranch. Of course he wanted her gone. 1 week, he said finally. Trial period. You tend to Ember help with whatever else needs doing. I'll pay you 50 cents a day plus room and board. After a week, we decide if this arrangement works for both of us. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. 50 cents, that's too much. It's the going rate for ranch work. Take it or leave it. She should leave it. Should walk away from this strange, solitary man and his ranch at the edge of nowhere. Should go back to town, where at least the cruelty was familiar. But Eleanor Whitmore had walked 5 miles through hell to deliver a blank letter, and she'd survived. She'd tamed an untamable horse with nothing but patience and gentle hands. Maybe she could survive this too. I'll take it. Nathaniel nodded once sharp and final. Then get yourself some breakfast. Work starts in an hour. He turned back to his tasks, and Eleanor stood in the morning light watching him go. The town had sent her here as a joke, as entertainment, as the Scarecrow they could all laugh at. But standing there on Broken Spur Ranch with a healing horse and a bum, and a man who'd caught her when she fell, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd been sent exactly where she needed to be, even if it meant standing face to face with the beast everyone feared, even if it meant risking her heart on a place and a person that might brave it. She'd been called Scarecrow for so long, she'd almost forgotten scarecrows weren't meant to run. They were meant to stand their ground. And Eleanor Whitmore was done running. The first morning of Eleanor's trial week began with silence and coffee so strong it could strip paint. Nathaniel handed her a tin cup without comment, gestured toward a plate of biscuits and bacon on the table, then walked outside before she could say thank you. Through the kitchen window, she watched him stride toward the barn's shoulders, set in a line that said he regretted his decision already. Eleanor ate quickly, washed her dishes in the basin, then stood in the middle of the kitchen wondering what exactly she was supposed to do. He'd said work starts in an hour. What work? Where she found him in Ember's corral, checking the mare's leg with practiced demands. The horse stood still for him now. Not calm exactly, but accepting. It was a small miracle. How is she? Nathaniel didn't look up. Swelling's down another notch. You did good work. Eleanor's chest warmed at the praise, simple as it was. Should I change the poultice? After we feed the other horses. Come on. He led her to the barn, a massive structure that smelled of hay and leather and horse. Inside, 6 stalls lined each wall most occupied. The horses ranged from a massive draft animal. That's Goliath, Nathaniel said to a dappled gray mare who nickered softly at Eleanor's approach. That's Dove. She's gentle, good with new riders. He handed Eleanor a bucket of oats, 1/4 bucket per horse. Water's in the trough outside, make sure everyone has fresh. It was simple work, mindless work, but Eleanor threw herself into it with determination. She measured the oats, carefully hauled water until her arms ached, murmured greetings to each horse. Some ignored her, some sniffed her hands curiously. Goliath nearly knocked her over trying to get to his breakfast. Nathaniel worked alongside her in silence, their movements falling into an unspoken rhythm. When she struggled with Goliath's water bucket, the horse was massive, and she was not. Nathaniel simply took it from her hands and filled the trough himself. No comment, no criticism. After the horses were fed, he showed her the tack room, the hay storage, the small building where he kept veterinary supplies. Everything was organized, clean, maintained with a precision that spoke of military training or just a man who'd learned to survive alone. You served, Eleanor said. Not a question. Nathaniel's hands stilled on the bridle he was oiling. Colorado Cavalry came back in '73. 5 years ago, Eleanor did the math quickly. The war had been over for more than a decade, but the Western Territories had seen their share of violence after conflicts with native tribes, border skirmishes, the kind of fighting that didn't make it into history books. My father served too, she offered quietly. Union Army, he didn't talk about it much. Nathaniel nodded understanding in the gesture. Then he hung the bridle and moved on, the moment of connection closing like a door. By midday, Eleanor's body was screaming. Her blisters had blisters. Her sunburn from yesterday's walk had developed into a proper burn that made every movement painful. Her muscles, unused to this kind of labor, trembled with exhaustion. But she didn't complain, didn't slow down. When Nathaniel pointed to a pile of fence posts that needed moving, she moved them. When he asked her to muck out stalls, she grabbed a pitchfork and got to work. At noon, he called a break. They sat on the porch in the shade, eating cold chicken and bread in silence. Eleanor tried not to stare, but she couldn't help noticing details: the way he held his fork, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands that matched her own. "You're doing good work," he said finally. "Thank you. But you need to pace yourself. This isn't a race," Eleanor bristled despite herself. "I can keep up." He turned those storm cloud eyes on her, and she saw something there she hadn't expected: concern. "I'm not questioning your work ethic. I'm saying you're going to hurt yourself if you don't slow down. This is a trial week, Eleanor, not a trial by fire." She looked down at her plate, cheeks burning. I want to prove I can do this." "You already did. The moment you walked 5 miles in that heat without water." His voice softened just a fraction. "You don't need to prove anything else." After lunch, he sent her to change Ember's poultice while he rode out to check the fence line. Eleanor worked slowly, talking to the mare the whole time, telling her about the other horses, about the ranch, about anything and everything, just to fill the silence. "You know what's strange?" she murmured, washing the wound gently. "He's not what they say. The beast, he's gruff, sure, quiet, but he's not cruel, not even a little bit." Ember's ear flicked back, listening. "The town makes him sound like a monster, like he'd shoot you for looking at him wrong. But he gave me water, fed me, let me sleep in a real bed." Eleanor applied the fresh poultice, her hands steady now with practice. "He's lonely, I think. That's what they mistake for meanness. Just loneliness. Talking to yourself." Eleanor jumped, nearly dropping the jar of honey. Nathaniel stood at the corral fence, having materialized like a ghost. "I was talking to Ember," she said defensively. "I heard." Was that amusement in his voice? "What else did you tell her? That I'm secretly a prince under a curse, that true love's kiss will break the spell?" Eleanor's face went hot. "I was just... She likes the sound of voices. It calms her." He climbed over the fence, moved close enough to inspect her work. Up close, she could smell leather and horse, and something uniquely him: wood smoke and sage. "Looks good. You have a gentle touch. My mother always said healing is 90% patience, 10% skill." "Your mother was wise." Eleanor tied off the cloth bandage. "She was. I wish I'd listened to her more when I had the chance." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then, "My wife used to say the same thing, about patience. She had more of it than anyone I've ever known." It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife. Eleanor held very still, afraid to break whatever spell had loosened his tongue. "She died," he continued, his voice flat in the way of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. "Fever. Took our daughter, too. Clara was 3 years old." Eleanor's heart cracked. "I'm so sorry." "Everyone's sorry. Doesn't bring them back." He turned away, jaw tight. "I'm going to check the north pasture. Finish up here, then you can rest for the afternoon. We'll do evening feeding at 6. He was halfway to the barn before Eleanor found her voice. "Nathaniel." He stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you for telling me." His shoulders rose and fell with a heavy breath. Then he continued walking, leaving Eleanor alone with Ember and the weight of his grief. That evening, Eleanor learned that Nathaniel Harrison could cook. Not just the basic trail food she'd expected, but real cooking: venison roasted with herbs, potatoes that had been crisped in the pan, greens sautéed with garlic. He moved around the kitchen with the same efficiency he brought to everything else, and Eleanor watched from the doorway, fascinated. "You going to stand there all night to set the table?" She scrambled to help, pulling out plates and utensils. They ate in the kitchen this time, sitting across from each other at a worn wooden table that had probably seen 100,000 meals. "This is delicious," Eleanor said around a mouthful of venison. "My wife taught me, said a man who couldn't feed himself was only half a man." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "I learned real quick." Eleanor found herself smiling back. Smart woman. The smartest. He took a drink of water, set down the glass carefully. "She would have liked you." Sarah had a soft spot for strays. "Am I a stray?" "Aren't you?" Eleanor considered this. "I suppose I am. The town certainly thinks so. The town's full of fools." It was said so matter-of-factly that Eleanor laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her. Nathaniel's eyebrows rose. What's funny? Nothing, just you don't mince words, do you? Life's too short for pretty lies. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, and Eleanor helped wash the dishes. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful to be real. I should check on Ember one more time, Eleanor said. I'll come with you. They walked to the corral together, their shadows long in the evening light. Ember stood in the center of the space, head up, ears forward. When she saw Eleanor, she walked over, actually walked, bearing full weight on the injured leg. Oh my God, Eleanor breathed. Look at her. Nathaniel let out a low whistle. 3 days ago, she could barely stand on that leg. Now she's walking like nothing happened. Eleanor climbed into the corral and Ember met her halfway, pressing her soft nose into Eleanor's palm. The mare's dark eyes were clear, no longer clouded with pain. You did this, Nathaniel said from the fence. You saved her. We did it together. No. He shook his head slowly. I've been trying to help this horse for weeks. She wouldn't let me near her. But you walked in and she trusted you. That's not training. That's not technique. That's something else. Eleanor stroked Ember's neck, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. She knew I understood what it's like to hurt and have everyone give up on you. To be called difficult when you're just surviving. When she looked back at Nathaniel, his expression had changed, softened. He was looking at her like she was something more than the Scarecrow, more than cheap labor, more than the girl Marcus had sent as a joke. He was looking at her like she mattered. Come on, he said quietly. It's getting dark. That night, Eleanor lay in bed and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling. Horses shifting in their stalls, wind in the cottonwoods, the old house creaking, and somewhere Nathaniel's footsteps as he made a final check of the property. She thought about her room at the boarding house, cramped, cold, lonely. Thought about Dusty Hollow and the faces that looked through her instead of at her. Thought about Marcus Thornton's smile, sharp and cruel. Then she thought about Ember's recovery, about Nathaniel's rare, almost smile, about doing work that mattered, that made a difference, that used her gentle hands for healing instead of just survival. 1 week, he'd said. Then they'd decide. Eleanor decided right then in that cool, dark room, she was going to make herself indispensable, was going to prove that the Scarecrow could not only stand, but could thrive. She was going to earn her place here, one gentle touch at a time. The second day began before dawn. Eleanor woke to the sound of a horse screaming. She bolted upright, heart hammering, and ran outside in her nightgown and bare feet. In the corral, Ember was thrashing wild-eyed and panicked, her injured leg buckling. Nathaniel was already there trying to calm her, but the mare was beyond reason. She reared, nearly catching him with her hooves, and he had to dive backward to avoid being struck. Eleanor, get back! But Eleanor was already climbing the fence, already moving toward the terrified animal. Ember, easy, easy, girl. The mare spun toward her, teeth bared, and for one heart-stopping moment, Eleanor thought she'd made a fatal mistake. But then Ember's wild eyes locked on hers and something shifted. Eleanor kept talking, kept moving forward, hands outstretched. I know, it hurts. I'm here. I'm right here. She reached the mare and pressed her forehead to Ember's neck, wrapping her arms around her, just holding on. The horse trembled, still panicked, but she didn't strike, didn't bite. Slowly, so slowly, the trembling eased. Eleanor began to hum, an old tune her mother used to sing, wordless and soothing. She felt Ember's breathing slow, felt the tension drain from the powerful muscles. That's it, she murmured. That's my good girl. When she finally stepped back, Nathaniel was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Fear, maybe, or awe. What the hell just happened? Eleanor looked down at the Ember's leg. The bandage had come loose in the thrashing and the wound. Oh no! The infection was back worse than before. The wound oozed angry red spreading from the edges. Eleanor's careful work undone. I don't understand, she whispered. It was healing. It was getting better. Nathaniel examined the leg, his face grim. She must have caught it on something, reopened it. Damn it. Eleanor fought back tears. She'd been so proud, so sure she was helping. And now we'll start over, Nathaniel said firmly. Clean it out fresh, poultice, keep her still. It's not your fault, Eleanor. But it felt like her fault. Felt like everything good she touched turned to disaster. They worked together as the sun rose, cleaning and treating the wound. Ember stood still for them, now exhausted from her panic. Eleanor's hands shook as she applied the honey mixture, and she had to blink back tears. "Stop that," Nathaniel said quietly. "Stop what?" "Blaming yourself. Wounds heal in their own time. Sometimes they get worse before they get better. That's just how it is. I should have checked her last night. Should have secured the bandage better." "Eleanor." He caught her chin, gently forcing her to meet his eyes. "You are not responsible for everything that goes wrong. You hear me?" His hand was rough, warm against her skin. This close, she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, the fine lines around them that spoke of years squinting into the sun. "I hear you," she whispered. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then released her and stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let's get breakfast. Then we've got work to do." The rest of the day passed in a blur of ranch chores. Eleanor threw herself into the work with renewed determination, as if she could somehow make up for Ember's setback through sheer effort. She mucked stalls, hauled water, helped Nathaniel repair a section of fence that had come loose. They didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable now. Companionable. Eleanor found she could predict his movements, hand him tools before he asked, fall into rhythm with his work patterns. In the afternoon, while Nathaniel rode out to move cattle to a different pasture, Eleanor decided to explore the house. Not snooping exactly, just learning about the man who'd given her sanctuary. The main room held a stone fireplace, two worn chairs, shelves lined with books. Eleanor ran her fingers along the spines: Shakespeare, Dickens, technical manuals on animal husbandry, a well-thumbed copy of Walt Whitman's poems. On the mantel sat a photograph in a simple frame, a woman and a small girl. The woman was beautiful, dark-haired, and smiling with kind eyes. The girl, Clara, was all dimples and curls caught mid-laugh. Eleanor's throat tightened. This was what Nathaniel had lost. This joy, this light, this family. She liked to pick wildflowers. Eleanor spun. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, hat in hand, watching her. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine." He crossed to the mantel, picked up the photograph with careful hands. Clara would pick every flower she could find, bring them to Sarah in bunches. Made a mess of the garden, but Sarah never minded. His thumb traced the frame's edge. "I used to get mad about it. The garden seems stupid now." It's not stupid to care about things. It's stupid to care more about a garden than about time. He set the photograph down carefully. "I'd give anything to see one more mess of flowers on the kitchen table." Eleanor didn't know what to say, didn't know if there were words adequate for that kind of loss. "You asked why I live out here alone," Nathaniel continued. "Why I'm the beast everyone's afraid of. This is why. After they died, I couldn't be around people. Couldn't stand the pity, the careful words, the way everyone walked on eggshells. So I came out here. Just me and the horses." "You're not a beast," Eleanor said quietly. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Town sure thinks I am. Marcus Thornton's been spreading stories for years. Says I killed a man in a card game. Says I beat my wife. Says I'm crazy with grief and liable to shoot anyone who comes near." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "And you let him? What's the point in fighting lies? People believe what they want to believe." He met her eyes. "You believed them too, didn't you? When you walked up here, she wanted to lie, but he'd said himself that life was too short for pretty lies." "Yes," she admitted. "I was terrified." And now, Eleanor looked at him. This man who'd caught her when she fell, who'd fed her and sheltered her, who'd shown her more kindness in 3 days than the whole town had shown in 3 years. "Now I think Marcus Thornton is the real monster, and the town's too blind to see it." Something flickered in Nathaniel's expression. Relief, maybe? Or gratitude? "Come on," he said. "Let's check on Ember." The mare's condition hadn't improved, but it hadn't worsened either. Eleanor changed the poultice again, working in the golden afternoon light, while Nathaniel watched. "You really care about her," he observed. "Of course I do." "Why?" Eleanor paused, considering the question. "Because she needed someone to care. And because—" She stroked Ember's neck gently. "Because I know what it's like to be difficult, to have people give up on you, to be alone. You're not alone now." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Eleanor wasn't sure she understood. "Neither are you," she said softly. Nathaniel opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head with something that might have been a smile. "Come on, Scarecrow, let's get dinner started." It was the first time he'd used the nickname, but somehow when he said it, it didn't sound like an insult. It sounded almost affectionate. That night over stew and fresh bread, Nathaniel asked about her mother. Eleanor found herself talking, really talking for the first time in years, about the herbs and remedies, about watching her mother bring babies into the world, about the gentle strength required to hold someone through pain. She sounds remarkable, Nathaniel said. She was. I wish I was more like her. You are like her. You have her hands, her patience. Eleanor looked down at her rough, calloused fingers. These aren't healing hands, not anymore. They healed Ember. They're healing her again. That counts. After dinner, they sat on the porch in the cooling evening air. The sky was a canvas of stars more than Eleanor had ever seen in town where lamplight drowned them out. It's beautiful, she breathed. Sarah loved the stars, used to make up stories about them. That one there, he pointed to a bright cluster. That's the lost girl looking for her way home. And that one's the Scarecrow standing guard in the field. Eleanor's heart squeezed. She made up a story about a scarecrow. She made up stories about everything, said the world was more interesting when you gave everything a purpose, even the small things, especially the small things. They sat in comfortable silence watching the stars wheel overhead. Eleanor felt something shifting inside her walls coming down, defenses crumbling the carefully constructed armor she'd built to survive the town's cruelty. Out here, she didn't need armor. Out here, she could just be Eleanor. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For this week, for the chance, for seeing me. Not just the scarecrow everyone else sees. Nathaniel turned to look at her, his face half in shadow, half in starlight. I see you, Eleanor Whitmore, and I have from the moment you walked up to Ember without fear. You're stronger than you think, braver than you know. Her breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever seen her as anything other than weak, pitiful, broken. She stood abruptly, suddenly overwhelmed. I should get some sleep. Early morning tomorrow. Eleanor, she paused at the door. You're doing good work here. Real good work. I hope you know that. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled to her room. Alone in the dark, Eleanor pressed her hands to her chest, feeling her heart race. Something was happening here. Something dangerous and wonderful and terrifying. She was starting to care. Not just about the work, not just about Ember, but about this gruff, lonely man who'd lost everything and built a fortress around his heart. She was starting to care about Nathaniel Harrison. And that Eleanor knew was the most dangerous thing of all. Because in 4 more days, the trial week would end. And she'd have to decide whether to stay in this place that felt like home with this man who felt like salvation, or whether to walk away before her heart got broken all over again. Outside, the stars wheeled on, indifferent to human struggles. The lost girl searched for her way home, and the scarecrow stood guard, watching over things that might bloom if given half a chance. The 4th morning dawned clear and cool with dew sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Eleanor woke early, dressed quickly, and headed to the corral before Nathaniel could beat her there. She wanted to check on Ember alone, wanted to see if the infection had finally started to turn around. What she found stopped her in her tracks. Ember stood in the center of the corral, head high, ears forward, and she was trotting. Actually trotting the injured leg, bearing weight without hesitation or pain. Oh my God, Eleanor whispered. The mare heard her and trotted over, pressing her nose into Eleanor's palm. The dark eyes were clear, bright, completely free of pain. Eleanor's hands shook as she unwrapped the bandage. The wound was still there, still healing, but the angry redness was gone. The swelling had disappeared. What remained was clean pink tissue knitting together properly. You did it, she told Ember, tears streaming down her face. You fought back. You're going to be okay. I'll be damned. Nathaniel stood at the fence, coffee cup in hand, staring at Ember with undisguised amazement. She's better, Eleanor said unnecessarily. Better than better. He shook his head. That's impossible. 3 days ago, I was considering putting her down. Now she's trotting like nothing happened. Eleanor climbed out of the corral, unable to keep the grin off her face. I told you, healing hands. Nathaniel looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression made Eleanor's breath catch. You're something else, Eleanor Whitmore. Before she could respond, he turned and walked toward the barn, leaving Eleanor standing in the morning light, heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with Ember's recovery. The day passed in a blur of work and small miracles. Ember continued to improve, walking without a limp by afternoon. The other horses seemed to sense the shift, becoming calmer, more cooperative. Even Goliath, who usually treated Eleanor like a mobile buffet he was trying to knock over, behaved himself. Nathaniel seemed lighter too, not exactly cheerful, but less weighted down by invisible burdens. He caught Eleanor's eye across the barn and smiled, an actual smile, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less haunted, made her heart do things she absolutely could not afford. "You're staring," he said. Eleanor flushed and looked away. "No, I'm not. You were definitely staring. I was thinking. About, about how different you look when you smile. You should do it more often." The smile widened just a fraction. "Haven't had much reason to, until recently." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then a horse whinnied, breaking the spell, and they both went back to work. That evening, Nathaniel announced they were celebrating Ember's recovery. "Celebrating how?" Eleanor asked. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey, the good stuff he claimed, and 2 glasses. "Sarah always said healing deserved acknowledging. Otherwise, you only remember the pain." They sat on the porch as the sun set, sipping whiskey that burned Eleanor's throat but warmed her chest. Nathaniel told stories about Sarah and Clara, about the early days of the ranch, about his time in the cavalry. Eleanor listened, fascinated by this glimpse into his past. "Your turn," he said, pouring them both another finger of whiskey. "Tell me about you. The real you, not the Scarecrow the town made." Eleanor hesitated. No one had ever asked her that before. "I don't know if there is a real me anymore. I've been surviving so long, I forgot how to just be." "Try." So she did. She told him about her mother's garden, about learning the names of herbs in Latin, about dreams she'd had as a child of becoming a healer like her mother, about how those dreams died with her parents buried under poverty and shame. "But now," Nathaniel prompted, "now, I don't know, this week has been—" She struggled for words. "It's been the first time in years I've felt useful, needed, like I matter." "You do matter. To Ember, maybe. To me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "Nathaniel, I mean it." He set down his glass, turned to face her fully. "When you walked up here 5 days ago, I was ready to send you straight back. Thought Marcus was playing one of his games, sending some spy or troublemaker. But you," he shook his head, "you changed everything. This ranch feels different with you here. Feels alive again." Eleanor couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at this man who'd somehow seen past her scars to something worth keeping. "The trial week ends tomorrow," he continued, "and I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "Stay. Not for a week, not for a month. Stay for as long as you want. I'll pay you $50 a month plus room and board. You'll have your own space, your own money, your own life, and you'll never have to go back to that town or those people who treated you like you were nothing." $50 a month, more money than Eleanor had seen in her entire life. Security, safety, a home. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you're good with the horses. Because you work hard. Because—" He paused, jaw working. "Because I'm tired of being alone. And because having you here makes the ghosts a little quieter." Eleanor's eyes burned with tears. "I don't know what to say." Say yes. She should think about it, should weigh her options, consider the implications, be practical. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was yes. God, yes. Nathaniel's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank God. I was worried you'd say no." "Why would I say no? This is, this is more than I ever dreamed of." "Good." He stood, held out his hand. "Then it's settled. Welcome home, Eleanor." She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. They stood close, closer than propriety dictated, and Eleanor could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Home," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." The next week passed in a haze of contentment Eleanor had never experienced. She fell into the rhythms of ranch life like she'd been born to it. Morning feeding stall, mucking fence, mending evening care. Her hands grew more calloused, her muscles stronger, her skin tanned from hours in the sun. But more than physical changes, Eleanor felt herself changing inside. The constant anxiety that had plagued her in town, the worry about money, about where she'd sleep, about whether she'd eat, gradually faded. She woke up knowing she had a place, knowing she mattered. And Nathaniel was changing too. He talked more, smiled more, even laughed on occasion, a rusty sound like machinery that hadn't been used in years but genuine. He taught Eleanor to ride his hands, steadying her in the saddle, his voice patient as she learned to move with the horse instead of against it. "You're a natural," he said one afternoon, watching her canter dove around the corral. Eleanor beamed at the praise. "I have a good teacher." They fell into evening routines, cooking dinner together, eating on the porch, talking as the stars came out. Sometimes they discussed the day's work, the horse's progress plans for the ranch. Sometimes they talked about bigger things, philosophy, memories, dreams. "What would you do if you could do anything?" Nathaniel asked one night. Eleanor considered. "I'd want to help people. Use what my mother taught me. Maybe be a real healer, not just for horses, but for people too." "You could do that. There's no doctor for 50 miles. People around here need someone with medical knowledge." "They'd never trust me. I'm the Scarecrow, remember? Out here, you're Eleanor, and if you help them the way you helped Ember, they'd trust you just fine." The idea planted itself in Eleanor's mind, a seed of possibility. Maybe, someday. But then everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks into Eleanor's permanent arrangement, when the rider appeared. Eleanor was in the barn grooming Dove when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. She stepped outside to see Nathaniel standing in the yard, rifle in hand, watching 3 riders come up the path. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She recognized the lead rider, Marcus Thornton. "Well, well," Marcus called out, reining in his horse. "The Scarecrow lives. Color me surprised." Nathaniel's grip on the rifle tightened. "State your business, Marcus, then get off my property." "Now is that any way to greet old friends?" Marcus dismounted his 2 companions, ranch hands Eleanor didn't recognize following suit. "I just came to check on my investment." "What investment?" "The girl." Marcus gestured to Eleanor. "I sent her here, didn't I? Feels only right I make sure she's being properly compensated for her labors." Eleanor stepped forward. "I'm fine, Mr. Thornton. You can leave now." "Fine," Marcus's eyebrows rose. "Truly, because word around town is you've gone and made yourself quite comfortable out here. Some are saying the beast has himself a new wife already." Nathaniel took a step forward. "Watch your mouth." "I'm just repeating what I've heard." Marcus's smile was all teeth. "People talk Harrison. They wonder what a young girl is doing living alone with a man of your reputation." "My reputation?" Nathaniel's voice was dangerously quiet. "The reputation you created with your lies. I only tell people what they already suspect. That you're dangerous, unstable, that you drove your first wife to an early grave with your temper." Eleanor gasped. "That's not true. His wife died of fever." "Did she?" Marcus turned his cold gaze on her. "Or is that just what he told you? Were you there, little Scarecrow? Did you see the body?" Nathaniel raised the rifle. "Get off my property." "I'll go, but first I have a message from the good people of Dusty Hollow." Marcus pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "They've filed a formal complaint with the territorial marshal. Seems they're concerned about a minor living in sin with a known violent criminal." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "I'm not a minor. I'm 19. Can you prove it? Got a birth certificate, legal documentation?" Marcus's smile widened. "No thought not. See, without proof, the marshal might decide you're too young to be making your own choices, might decide to take you into protective custody until your real age can be verified." "This is insane," Eleanor spat. "You sent me here yourself. I sent you to deliver a letter. What you chose to do after that," he shrugged. "Well, that's between you and Harrison. But the town has concerns, and those concerns need addressing." Nathaniel's face had gone white. "You son of a bitch. This is about the land, isn't it?" "I don't know what you mean. My property borders your ranch. You've wanted this land for years. This is just another way to force me out." Marcus's expression didn't change, but Eleanor saw the truth in his eyes. This had never been about her. She was just a pawn in whatever game Marcus was playing. "The marshal will be here within the week," Marcus said. "I suggest you prepare your defense. Come, gentlemen." The three men mounted their horses and rode away, leaving Eleanor and Nathaniel standing in the dust. "It's not true," Eleanor said immediately. "About my age. I turned 19 last March. I can ask the church for records, or it doesn't matter if it's true." Nathaniel lowered the rifle, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. "Marcus has influence. Money. If he wants to make trouble, he will." "So what do we do?" Nathaniel looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked defeated. "I don't know." That night, neither of them could eat. They sat on the porch in silence, watching the sun set, both lost in thought. "I could leave," Eleanor said finally. "Go somewhere else. That would solve the problem." "No," Nathaniel's response was immediate, fierce. "You're not leaving. This is your home now. But if the marshal, then we'll deal with the marshal, together." He turned to her, eyes blazing. "I'm not letting Marcus Thornton take anything else from me. Not this ranch, not this life, and especially not you." Eleanor's breath caught. "Nathaniel." "I mean it, Eleanor. You belong here, and I'll fight anyone who says different." The intensity in his voice and his eyes made her heart race. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him what his words meant to her, but before she could speak, a sound split the night, glass shattering. They both jumped to their feet. In the distance, orange light flickered fire, Eleanor realized with horror. Coming from the barn. "No," Nathaniel breathed. Then louder, "No!" He ran, and Eleanor ran after him, her heart in her throat. The barn, the horses' ember. They rounded the corner to see flames licking up the side of the structure, spreading fast. Inside, horses screamed in panic. "Get water!" Nathaniel shouted, already running toward the barn door. "We need to get them out!" Eleanor ran for the well, her mind blank with terror. Not the horses. Please, God, not the horses. She hauled up bucket after bucket, throwing water on the flames, but it was like trying to stop an avalanche with a teaspoon. The fire spread, hungry and vicious. Nathaniel emerged from the barn leading Goliath and two other horses, their eyes rolling white with fear. He shoved the reins into Eleanor's hands. "Take them to the far corral, then stay there." "I'm not—" "Eleanor, please." His face was stark with fear. "I can't lose you too. Please just stay safe." He disappeared back into the smoke before she could argue. Eleanor got the horses to safety, then stood frozen, watching the barn burn. Nathaniel emerged, twice more, leading out horses coughing from the smoke. But there were 12 horses total. He'd only brought out 7. Eleanor's heart stopped. Ember was still inside. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She grabbed a blanket from the corral fence, dunked it in the water trough, and ran toward the barn. "Eleanor, no," Nathaniel's voice hoarse and desperate, but she was already inside. The smoke was thick, choking, burning her lungs with each breath. The heat was immense, pressing against her skin like a physical weight. Through the haze, she could see flames consuming the hay storage, spreading toward the stalls. "Ember!" she screamed. A whinny answered her, terrified and close. Eleanor stumbled forward, the wet blanket pressed to her face until she found Ember's stall. The mare was wild with panic, rearing and kicking at the wooden walls. Eleanor threw open the stall door, grabbed the lead rope hanging nearby, and somehow, through luck or desperation or divine intervention, managed to loop it around Ember's neck. "Come on, girl, we have to go, now." The ceiling cracked overhead, sending sparks raining down. Eleanor didn't look up, didn't think about what would happen if the roof collapsed. She just pulled guiding Ember through the smoke toward the rectangle of night air that marked the door. They burst out into the clear air, both coughing, both alive. Nathaniel was there immediately, taking Ember's rope, his face a mask of fury and relief. "What the hell were you thinking?" "She was still inside," Eleanor gasped. "I couldn't leave her. You could have died." "So could she." They stared at each other, smoke-stained and shaking, and then Nathaniel was pulling her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. "Don't ever do that again," he said into her hair. "Don't ever scare me like that." Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, feeling his heart hammering against her cheek. "I'm okay. We're both okay." Behind them, the barn burned, but all 12 horses were safe, clustered in the far corral, watching the flames consume their shelter. It took until dawn for the fire to burn itself out. What remained was a skeleton of charred beams and ash, the smell of smoke hanging heavy in the air. Eleanor and Nathaniel sat on the porch steps exhausted and covered in soot watching the sun rise over the ruins. This was Marcus, Nathaniel said flatly. Had to be. You don't know that. Who else? The timing's too perfect. He comes here, makes his threats, and that same night my barn burns down. He shook his head. He's trying to force me out, destroy everything until I have no choice but to sell. Eleanor's hands curled into fists. We can't let him win. I don't know how to stop him. Nathaniel sounded defeated in a way she'd never heard before. He has money, power, the law on his side. What do I have? A burned barn and a reputation as the town monster. You have me. He turned to look at her eyes red-rimmed from smoke. You have me, Eleanor repeated firmly, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll rebuild the barn. We'll fight the marshal's inquiry. We'll prove Marcus is behind this. Eleanor. No, she stood legs shaky but stands firm. I ran from Dusty Hollow. I ran from everything for years, but I'm done running. This is my home now, and I'll be damned if I let Marcus Thornton take it from us. Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression. Hope fragile, but real. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He stood, took her smoke-stained, calloused hand in his. Then we fight. Together, Eleanor said. Together. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the night Eleanor Whitmore, the girl they'd called Scarecrow, the girl they'd sent to Deed, the girl who'd tamed the untouchable, stood her ground. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time in her life, Eleanor wasn't afraid, because she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not just a home, not just a purpose, but a reason to fight. And his name was Nathaniel Harrison. Thank you so much for joining Eleanor and Nathaniel on this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of courage, healing, and unexpected love. The Scarecrow's story continues in parts 4 and 5. You won't want to miss what happens when Marcus comes back with fire and how Eleanor becomes the reason the monster finally falls. See you in the next chapter.